Okay, so strap in, everybody, because today we are diving into some pretty uncharted territory.
Yeah.
This whole idea of a strategic Bitcoin reserve for the
Yeah.
U.S.
Right.
You sent over a bunch of fascinating stuff, a whole mix, congressional bills, market predictions.
Uh,
Even some economists are pretty skeptical about the whole thing.
yeah.
So, what's the deal with all this? What does it all actually mean?
Well, it's fascinating because I think what we're really seeing here uh, is maybe a turning point in how governments are actually viewing cryptocurrency,
Okay.
Bitcoin
Right.
specifically. Imagine the U.S. treating Bitcoin like gold or oil, like a strategic asset that it just holds in reserve.
Mm-hmm.
But the question is why?
Right.
What are the upsides and downsides? What
Yeah.
could it mean for you?
Yeah.
What could it mean for the average person?
Exactly. And to understand that why, I think we need to understand, what is actually being proposed.
Right.
And we've got this Bitcoin Act of 2024 from Senator Loomis,
Yeah.
and it's causing quite a stir.
It is a pretty ambitious bill.
Yeah.
It proposes that the U.S. Treasury would buy 1 million Bitcoin
Wow.
over 5 years,
That's a lot.
which is a huge chunk of the total supply.
Yeah.
And you might be wondering, where would they even store all that Bitcoin?
Right.
Well, the act lays out plans for this decentralized network of secure facilities across the U.S.,
Interesting.
like a digital Fort Knox,
Yeah.
but, spread out for extra security.
So instead of a vault full of gold bars, we're
Yeah.
talking about like a network of servers holding millions of Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly.
That's quite a leap.
Yeah, and it gets even more interesting.
Okay.
This strategic Bitcoin reserve wouldn't just be for newly purchased Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
It would also transfer any Bitcoin the government already holds from things like those massive Silk Road seizures a few years back.
Oh, right. That whole Silk Road thing where they ended up with a ton of Bitcoin.
Right.
What are the implications of using that seized Bitcoin for this?
Well, for starters, it raises questions about the government's role in this whole crypto space. Is it really appropriate for them to be profiting from these kinds of confiscated assets?
Right.
What kind of precedent does it set for future seizures? It's a bit of a legal and ethical gray area.
Definitely adds another layer of complexity to the whole situation.
Yeah.
But it seems like this Bitcoin reserve idea is gaining some serious traction.
It is.
I mean, didn't former President Trump recently endorse it?
He did. And he even suggested that they use those 200,000 seized Bitcoin
Wow.
as a starting point.
Okay.
So the concept seems to have some bipartisan support, at least on like a conceptual level.
Yay.
But how do those political endorsements translate into an actual real-world impact?
Yeah. That's what we need to figure out.
That's what we need to unpack.
So politicians are on board,
Hmm.
but what about the financial world? How are they reacting to all of this?
Well, CoinShares, this leading crypto investment firm, put out an analysis suggesting that if the government backs Bitcoin through this act,
Okay.
it could actually be a much bigger driver of adoption than even the launch of Bitcoin ETFs was.
That's a bold statement.
It is a bold claim.
What makes them think it would be so impactful?
They argue that it would legitimize Bitcoin in the eyes of these huge institutional investors.
Mm-hmm.
Think pension funds, hedge funds,
Right.
the big players that have always been hesitant to jump into crypto.
Yeah.
If the U.S. government is holding Bitcoin as this strategic asset,
Right.
it's like sending a signal that they see it as a viable long-term investment.
So like a seal of approval from Uncle Sam,
Yep.
potentially opening the floodgates for all this institutional money to flow into the crypto market.
Exactly.
Okay.
But it raises a really important question.
Yeah.
What happens to the U.S. dollar if this scenario actually plays out?
Right.
How does all this impact the dollar's role as the world's leading reserve currency?
That's where I need you to break it down for me because, Bitcoin is often seen as a hedge against inflation.
Mm-hmm.
So wouldn't a strategic Bitcoin reserve actually weaken the dollar?
It's not quite that simple.
Okay.
There's a bit of a paradox here.
Yeah. Could holding Bitcoin as a reserve asset actually end up helping the U.S. dollar system in the long run?
Okay.
Think about it as the government prints more dollars, potentially leading to inflation. The value of their Bitcoin holdings would theoretically rise.
Oh, so it's like creating a safety net for themselves, hedging against the very inflation that they might be causing.
Precisely. It improves their balance sheet.
Right.
It could make it easier to justify things like raising the debt ceiling and printing even more dollars.
Okay.
Of course, this is all highly debated.
Right.
Some argue it's just kicking the can down the road instead of addressing any fundamental economic issues.
Sure. So is this a deliberate strategy to prop up the dollar? Or are they inadvertently setting the stage for Bitcoin to become even more dominant? It's a bit of a financial thriller.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And this isn't just a U.S. story.
Right.
We're actually seeing similar discussions happening globally.
Oh, really?
Canada and Honduras have both expressed interest in creating their own strategic Bitcoin reserves. So the U.S. could be setting a global trend here.
Potentially.
But what about countries that aren't so friendly with the U.S.?
That's where things get even more interesting.
Okay.
Think about Russia, for example.
Mm-hmm.
They're already using Bitcoin to circumvent sanctions.
Right.
And there are rumors that the UAE and other Gulf states are quietly building their own Bitcoin holdings,
Wow.
playing a different kind of game altogether.
So it's almost like a global arms race, but with Bitcoin instead of weapons.
Yeah.
Everyone's trying to figure out how to position themselves strategically in this new financial landscape.
Yeah.
But what about a country like El Salvador, which was the first to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender? What lessons can we learn from their experience?
Well, El Salvador's situation really highlights the complexities of integrating Bitcoin into these existing financial systems.
Okay.
They're facing pressure from the International Monetary Fund to backtrack on Bitcoin tax collection in exchange for a loan.
Wow.
So it's a reminder that the path to mainstream crypto adoption
Yeah.
is rarely smooth.
So even though they were pioneers in Bitcoin adoption, they're now having to make some pretty big compromises.
Yeah.
What does that tell us about the challenges other countries might face?
It really underscores this tension between the decentralized nature of Bitcoin
Right.
and the centralized power of institutions like the IMF.
Yeah.
It raises a critical question. Can Bitcoin truly thrive within the current global financial system?
Okay, so we've talked about the political landscape, the potential impact on the dollar,
Right.
the global response to the strategic Bitcoin reserve idea.
Yeah.
But let's get into the nitty-gritty.
Okay.
Are there concerns about the technical side of things or how this might impact the Bitcoin market itself?
Absolutely. One of the biggest concerns is centralization.
Okay.
If governments and institutions start holding massive amounts of Bitcoin on exchanges like Coinbase,
Yeah.
it creates a single point of failure.
Right.
Imagine a scenario where you have a cyber attack that targets Coinbase.
Uh-oh.
What happens to the government's Bitcoin holdings?
Right.
What happens to the market? What happens to your Bitcoin?
It defeats the purpose if a few entities end up controlling a big chunk of the supply.
Right.
And didn't the creators of Bitcoin envision a system that was totally free from that kind of centralized control?
Yeah, it seems like a fundamental contradiction.
It does.
And it raises concerns about potential market manipulation as well.
How so?
What if a government decides to suddenly sell a large portion of its Bitcoin?
Oh.
It could send shockwaves through the market, impacting the value of Bitcoin for everyone, including you.
So it's not as simple as just buying a bunch of Bitcoin and calling it a day.
Definitely not.
There are a lot of potential risks to consider.
Yeah.
And then there's the question of how all this will impact Bitcoin's price.
Right.
Just the discussion of strategic reserves has already influenced the market.
It has.
And analysts are saying that the potential for large-scale government buying hasn't even been fully priced in yet.
That's right.
So we're talking about a situation where the government's actions could directly impact the value of your Bitcoin holdings.
Yeah.
That's something everyone needs to be aware of.
Absolutely. And it's not just about potential price fluctuations.
Right.
We also need to consider the philosophical implications
Okay.
of government involvement in Bitcoin.
Right.
There's a whole camp that's vehemently opposed to the idea of government-held Bitcoin reserves.
You're right. We've mainly focused on the arguments for this idea.
We have.
I'm curious to hear the other side.
Yeah.
What are the main criticisms from those who oppose it?
Well, their core argument is that Bitcoin was designed to be separate from state control.
Right.
You know, it was a way to opt out of the traditional financial system.
Yeah.
They believe that government involvement goes against the very principles of decentralization
Right.
and individual sovereignty that Bitcoin was built on.
So they see this strategic Bitcoin reserve as a sort of betrayal of Bitcoin's original purpose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They argue that instead of hoarding Bitcoin, governments should focus on creating an environment where Bitcoin can actually flourish organically,
Interesting.
allowing tax payments in Bitcoin or fostering its use as a medium of exchange.
So instead of trying to control Bitcoin,
Yeah.
They believe government should just kind of let it do its thing.
That's the gist of it.
Okay.
They believe that true Bitcoin adoption comes from the ground up,
Mm-hmm.
not from top-down government mandates.
Right.
It's this clash of ideologies,
Yeah.
the centralized versus the decentralized,
Yeah.
and it's playing out right before our eyes.
It's fascinating how something as complex as Bitcoin
Yeah,
can spark these really fundamental debates about the role of government and the nature of money.
it is fascinating.
But there's one thing I'm still curious about. You mentioned earlier that the Gulf states might be taking a more stealthy approach to Bitcoin acquisition.
Yeah.
What's going on there?
That's one of the most intriguing aspects of this whole story.
Okay.
Unlike democratic nations that have to publicly declare their intentions, countries like the UAE can accumulate Bitcoin discreetly before they make any kind of announcement.
Interesting.
Imagine the implications if they've been quietly building this massive Bitcoin stash without anyone knowing.
So they could be benefiting from price appreciation before they even reveal their holdings,
Potentially, yeah.
potentially influencing the market in their favor.
Right.
That's a bold strategy.
It is.
It makes you wonder what other moves are happening behind closed doors.
It really does. It highlights the strategic maneuvering that's happening on a global scale.
Yeah.
Governments are starting to realize the potential of Bitcoin, and they're all trying to figure out the best way to play their hand.
Okay, so we've got governments openly endorsing Bitcoin,
Mhm.
others quietly accumulating it,
Right.
and still others pushing back against the whole idea.
Yeah,
It's a fascinating mix of viewpoints and strategies.
it is.
And it makes me wonder, what does it all mean for the average person? How do we navigate this evolving financial landscape? What should you, the listener, be thinking about as all this unfolds?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's a question we'll continue to explore in part 2 of our deep dive into this strategic Bitcoin reserve.
All right, looking forward to it.
Stay tuned.
Okay, so we're back
We are.
and ready to unpack some of these potential scenarios that could unfold
Yeah,
as this whole strategic Bitcoin reserve idea plays out.
right.
In part 1, we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah,
The proposed legislation, the global implications, the benefits, the risks.
right.
But what does it all actually mean for, the average person?
Yeah.
What's the best case scenario here?
Yeah.
And what about the worst case?
Well, the interesting thing is that the potential outcomes are so wide-ranging.
Okay.
In a best-case scenario,
Yeah.
strategic Bitcoin reserves could actually lead to more stability for the crypto market as a whole.
Oh.
Increased legitimacy in the eyes of these major institutions
Mhm.
could attract even more investment,
Right.
potentially leading to more innovation
Okay.
and creating new opportunities for individuals to participate in this emerging digital economy.
So more adoption, more innovation,
Yeah.
potentially more financial freedom.
Potentially.
Yeah. That sounds pretty promising.
Yeah, it sounds good.
But I'm guessing it's not all sunshine and rainbows.
No.
What are some of the potential downsides here?
Yeah, we have to consider the other side of the coin, right?
Right.
Increased government involvement
Mm-hmm.
could lead to excessive regulation
Okay.
and control stifling the very innovation that makes Bitcoin so attractive in the first place.
That's a concern I've heard from a lot of Bitcoin enthusiasts.
Yeah.
They argue the whole point is to be decentralized,
Hmm.
free from government interference.
Right. And if governments start using their Bitcoin holdings to manipulate markets or control the flow of capital,
Yeah.
it could erode trust in the system and undermine its core principles.
So it's a delicate balancing act.
It is.
And the outcome is far from certain.
Right.
So how do we as individuals
Yeah.
navigate this evolving financial landscape?
Yeah, that's the big question.
What steps can we take to be prepared
Yeah.
for whatever comes next?
Well, I think the key is to stay informed and to think critically
Mm-hmm.
about the information you're consuming.
Right.
Don't just take headlines at face value.
Yeah.
Dig deeper.
Okay.
Consider different perspectives and
Mhm.
ask yourself,
Yeah.
what are the potential motivations behind these actions?
Right.
The actions of governments and institutions.
Okay.
How could these actions impact me, both positively and negatively?
So it's not just about understanding the technology.
No.
It's about understanding the forces that are shaping its adoption and its future.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Bitcoin isn't just a piece of code.
Right.
It's a catalyst for change.
Okay.
And that change is happening on multiple levels.
Mhm.
Technological,
Economic. Right. Social and political.
We need to be aware of all those things if we want to make informed decisions.
Exactly.
One thing that really stood out to me in the sources we reviewed
Yeah.
was this idea that strategic Bitcoin reserves
Mm-hmm.
could actually buy time for the current fiat dollar system.
Yeah. Interesting.
Why would governments want to prolong the inevitable?
Yeah.
Wouldn't they be better off embracing a new system?
It's a question of power and control, right?
Okay,
The current financial system gives governments a lot of leverage.
right.
They can print money, set interest rates, influence markets.
Mm-hmm.
A truly decentralized system like Bitcoin challenges that authority.
Ah, so there's a vested interest in maintaining the status quo.
To some extent, yes,
Okay,
but it's not necessarily a malicious thing.
right.
There's also a legitimate concern about the potential disruption
Okay.
that a rapid shift to a Bitcoin-based system could cause.
Yeah.
Imagine the economic and social upheaval if the dollar were to suddenly lose its dominance. So it's like ripping off a Band-Aid.
Yeah,
A slow, controlled transition might be less painful
it might be.
than a sudden, chaotic one,
Yeah.
even if the end result is the same.
Exactly. It's about managing risk, minimizing potential fallout.
Right.
Of course, the question is who gets to manage that risk
Right.
and who benefits from the approach.
Yeah. These are questions we need to be asking ourselves
We do.
as this story continues to unfold.
Absolutely.
Speaking of risk,
Yeah.
one of the sources mentioned that countries like the UAE
Mm-hmm.
might be accumulating Bitcoin discreetly.
Right.
What are the implications of this type of behind-the-scenes maneuvering?
Well, it raises some very interesting questions about transparency and fairness.
Okay.
If certain countries are quietly amassing Bitcoin while others are making these public pronouncements,
Yeah.
it creates an uneven playing field.
Right.
It's like a high-stakes poker game,
Yeah.
where some players are holding their cards close to the vest,
Mm.
while others are showing their hand.
So the countries making the most noise about Bitcoin
Right.
might actually be the ones with the least to gain.
It's possible.
That's a thought-provoking concept.
It is, and it makes you
Yeah.
wonder what the true motivations are behind some of these public pronouncements.
Right.
Are they genuine,
Okay.
or are they strategic maneuvers designed to influence the market
Yeah.
or distract from other activities?
It seems like we're entering a new era of financial geopolitics,
I think we are.
where Bitcoin is becoming like a key piece
Yeah.
on the global chessboard.
Absolutely. And the moves being made today will have far-reaching consequences.
Right.
It's a fascinating and potentially transformative time to be alive.
It is.
And it's more important than ever to stay informed and engage in these conversations.
Well said. So we've covered a lot of ground today,
We have.
exploring the potential implications of a strategic Bitcoin reserve from a lot of different angles.
A lot of different angles.
But before we wrap things up, I want to leave you with something to ponder.
Oh. Okay. Something to think about.
Something that goes beyond the specifics of these sources
Yeah.
and delves into the bigger picture.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Lay it on us.
What if this whole discussion
Yeah.
about strategic Bitcoin reserves is just a distraction,
Okay.
a way to focus our attention on a narrow set of possibilities
Mm-hmm.
while something much bigger is happening beneath the surface?
Oh, now you've got my attention.
What could be happening
Yeah.
that's even bigger than governments buying up Bitcoin?
What if the real game changer isn't about who owns Bitcoin,
Okay.
but about how it's being used
Right.
and what it's evolving into?
Interesting.
We've talked about Bitcoin as a store of value, a hedge against inflation.
Right.
But what if it's evolving into something much more than that?
So you're saying the focus on strategic reserves might be blinding us to other
Yeah.
potentially more significant developments?
Yeah, potentially more significant developments in the Bitcoin ecosystem.
Okay.
We've seen hints of this in the sources. A discussion of Bitcoin's use in circumventing sanctions,
Right.
the potential for it to facilitate new forms of economic activity,
Right.
the emergence of decentralized finance applications built on Bitcoin.
Oh.
These are just a few examples of how Bitcoin is being used in ways that go beyond its initial conception as a digital currency.
So instead of just asking who owns Bitcoin, I
Right.
should be asking what can Bitcoin do?
Exactly.
And how is it changing the way we think about money and value?
Exactly. And as we continue to explore those questions,
Yeah.
we may find that the real story of Bitcoin isn't about governments and institutions,
Okay.
but about individuals and communities using this technology to empower themselves and create a more equitable and decentralized future.
It's a powerful thought.
It is.
It definitely challenges the narrative we hear
It does.
about Bitcoin being primarily a tool for speculation or wealth accumulation.
Right. And it brings us back to the importance of critical thinking
Mhm.
and staying informed.
Yeah.
We need to look beyond the headlines,
Okay.
question assumptions,
Right.
and be open to the possibility
Yeah.
that the most significant developments are happening outside the spotlight,
Interesting.
driven by individuals who are using Bitcoin in ways we haven't even imagined yet.
So we've gone from the concrete details of proposed legislation
Yeah.
to the broader philosophical implications of Bitcoin's evolution.
We have. It's been quite a journey.
It really has. Yeah, it really has been quite a journey. We started by unpacking this idea of strategic Bitcoin reserve
Mm-hmm.
and ended up exploring some pretty profound questions about the future of money and power,
Right.
even the role of government.
It is amazing how something as seemingly technical as Bitcoin can spark such wide-ranging discussions.
It is.
It's a testament to its potential to disrupt and transform so many aspects of our world.
And that's what makes these deep dives so fascinating. You know, we're not just summarizing information.
Right.
We're grappling with ideas.
Yeah.
Trying to make sense of a rapidly changing landscape.
Absolutely. It's a process of collective discovery,
Yeah.
and it requires us to be open to new perspectives and willing to challenge our assumptions.
Speaking of challenging assumptions,
Yeah.
You really pushed us to think outside the box today,
I try.
especially with that final thought about the strategic Bitcoin reserve maybe being a distraction from even bigger developments in the Bitcoin ecosystem.
It's always important to question that dominant narrative
Yeah.
and consider those alternative possibilities.
Yeah.
We can't afford to be complacent or assume that we have all the answers.
Right. Yeah.
The world of Bitcoin is constantly evolving,
Yeah.
and we need to be adaptable and willing to learn as we go.
So what are some of the key takeaways you hope listeners will walk away with from this deep dive?
Well, I think the most important takeaway is that Bitcoin is more than just a digital currency.
Okay.
It's a technology with the potential to reshape how we think about money and value and even power.
Yeah.
It's a catalyst for change, and that change is happening on a global scale.
And it's not just about governments and institutions.
No, it's not.
It's about individuals and communities using Bitcoin in ways that empower them
Exactly.
and create a more equitable and decentralized future.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's about reclaiming control over our own financial lives
Yeah.
and building a system that is more transparent, more accountable, and more accessible to everyone.
So as this story continues to unfold, what should listeners be paying attention to? What are some of the key indicators that'll tell us which direction things are headed?
Well, one thing to watch for is the development of regulations and policies around Bitcoin.
Okay.
How governments choose to regulate this space will have a significant impact on its future trajectory.
And we need to pay attention to how Bitcoin is being used on the ground.
Yeah.
Not just by investors and speculators,
Right.
but by everyday people.
Right. Are we seeing real-world adoption?
Yeah.
Are businesses starting to accept Bitcoin? Are people using it to send remittances or make purchases?
These are the real indicators of Bitcoin's potential to become a mainstream technology.
Absolutely. And we also need to keep an eye on the technological advancements happening within the Bitcoin ecosystem.
Okay.
Things like the development of new protocols,
Right.
the improvement of scalability and security, the emergence of new applications and use cases.
So it's about staying informed on multiple fronts.
It is.
The regulatory landscape, the real-world adoption, the technological evolution.
Yeah,
It's a lot to keep track of.
it is, but that's part of the excitement.
Yeah.
We're witnessing the birth of a new technology with the potential to transform our world in really profound ways. And as with any transformative technology,
Yeah.
there will be challenges and setbacks
Right.
and unexpected twists and turns along the way.
But ultimately, the future of Bitcoin is not predetermined.
No, it's not.
It's being shaped right now by the choices we make,
Right.
the actions we take,
Yeah,
and the conversations we have.
absolutely. So stay curious, stay engaged, and keep asking questions.
Yeah.
The more informed we are, the better equipped we'll be to navigate this exciting and uncharted territory.
Well said. It's been an enlightening conversation.
It has.
And I think we've all gained a deeper understanding of the complexities and the possibilities surrounding this whole idea of a strategic Bitcoin reserve.
It's been a pleasure diving deep into this topic with you.
And to all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this journey of exploration.
Yes, thank you.
Remember, knowledge is power, and the more you know, the better prepared you'll be to navigate this ever-changing world around us.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.